Are you guys ready for another build? All right then, let's do this. All right, as you guys can see, I've got the parts laid out for another build. This is going to be a gaming PC using a Core i7, of course, Intel based. Some people want to know, hey, where's the AMD love? Once again, and I'll keep saying it as often as I have to, these systems are ordered by customers, and this is what the customer wants. So when a customer wants to order an AMD, that's when you'll see me build with AMD. But until that point, let's talk about the parts we are using, not the parts we're not. This is NZXT's Noctis 450 computer case. It's got some cool LED lighting built into it. There's a little switch here on the back to control that lighting. And it's got some pretty unique features on it. It does look a lot like the Phantom case, like what was the Phantom 410 that you guys have seen me build in other videos.
The NZXT Phantom 410 in gunmetal, which is exactly what I have right here.
That one.
So all those details.
This is quite a bit bigger. In fact, just to give you an idea how big this case really is, let me show you something. This is a Corsair 200R that you see me build with all the time. This is the machine that edits and renders and posts the videos to YouTube. So the fact that you're watching this video happened because of this machine right here. This is what made it possible. And there's quite a clearance difference between the top of this case and the top of this case. And it's actually a little bigger than the shipping boxes that I typically use. So I'm going to have to find a different shipping solution here. But we'll cross that bridge later. This build has got to happen quickly. This poor guy's been waiting so long for me to build his computer that I don't have time to do the traditional step-by-step build or even the Apprentice series, just too much time. So I'm just going to go ahead and build it, and then I will commentate after the fact in post-production, give you an idea of what I'm doing. And we're going to go through this one pretty quickly. If you want more information about any of these parts, you can just do a search here on YouTube for Noctis 450 review, and there's a number of review videos. And when it comes to the other parts, we've got the Maximus VIII Hero motherboard from Asus. We've got what I believe is 16 gigs of RAM. Yeah, 16 gigs of G.SKILL RAM. We've got a mechanical hard drive here. This is a Seagate. And, I can't even remember what size it is anymore. But it's, this is a 2 terabyte, that's what it is. Core i7 6700, Windows 10 Home Edition, Samsung 500 gig, this is the 850 EVO, solid state drive. Of course, the GTX 980 Ti. We've got an EVGA 850 watt modular power supply. And bring out the Kraken! Yes, it's the Kraken X61 liquid cooler, which we're going to put in there, also from NZXT. With the liquid cooler made by NZXT and the case made by NZXT, these things should fit together like they were meant to be. So I'm not anticipating any problems in getting this liquid cooler installed, but we'll see. And again, if you want any more detailed information specifically about any individual component that I'm using on this build, just in the search engine in YouTube, just type in the name of the component. If you want to know more about the 850 EVO, type in 850 EVO review. If you want to know more about the GTX 980 Ti, I think you get the idea here, right? Some people, they don't know how to see my other videos. They go, Carrie, do you have a video on this? Do you have a video? Well, look. Well, I don't know how to look. Well, type in the word Carrie and whatever you're looking for. If you're looking for a Windows 7 install video, type in Carrie Holzman, Windows 7 install. And let Google search bring up those things. Or maybe you're not sure what you want to watch, just click on my name on the, it's on my YouTube channel. It's right around this video. Click where you see Carrie Holzman and it'll take you right to my channel and show you all the 100 and 200 videos, whatever it is, that I have available, and look through and click on the ones that interest you. Now, that being said, I want to go ahead and get started on this build. I'm going to go ahead and shut the microphone down here, and I'll take it over with voiceover commentation and give you a heads up on what's going on. And hopefully I can get this thing built and test fired here right now today before I lose daylight. And that'll be like a new record for me as far as filming this while I'm making it, because as you're well aware, typically these build videos run anywhere from 90 minutes to 150 minutes in length. And the process in creating it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to do all the editing and the reshoots. So this one won't be as detailed, but it should just kind of be a rehash. If you've seen my other videos, everything should look familiar to you. We're just using some slightly different components. So let's get started. Okay, so here we go with the building process, and first thing I'm going to do is figure out how this front cover comes off. And I have to say, this one is a little bit of a bear to get off because there are a couple of long plastic hooks right there on the top. You see I'm kind of playing with them. I was afraid I was going to break those or bend them trying to get that off. It's an unusual design. And hopefully the top will come off much easier. And yeah, there it goes. That's normal, unlike the one on the front, which is a relief. And that's what's going through my mind right now, like, whew, relieved. You know, I don't really care for the NZXT cases because of the top of the case being angular, like the roof on a house. It's difficult, if not impossible, to rest anything on top of the computer case, like a USB external drive. And I like to use the top of my computer for putting stuff on there. In fact, one of the systems I built, you'll see in a previous video, which I'll have to link to, I sent to my good friend and co-host of Tech Bets, Mike Smith, and he ended up, over a period of time, pulling the top off of it because it was driving him crazy that he couldn't set anything on top, that it would just slide off. So that's my problem with the NZXT cases specifically. They do look good though. All right, now we got the side panels off, the front cover's off, the top is off, and now we can begin the case prep. It's kind of a magnetic filter, and it's got a little hook on the bottom. We've got 3 fans. Clearly, no place for anything external like an optical drive. Well, not external, but there's no place for no 5 1/4 inch bays. And let's see. Obviously, there's lots of room for external stuff, depending on how big your room is, right? So just getting the front port umbilicals unwrapped and out of the way, and right now, there we go. Now I've got the little box that has all of our case hardware there, and I'll show you what's in there. Dump it out here on the table. Is that it? That's it? Yep. Okay. So what do we have? A bag in a box that was in a case that was in a box. This is a cable. Oh, these are nylon zip ties that they've put together with a twist tie. I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, a twist tie wrapping around nylon zip ties. You got that? All right, whatever. What else do we have? There's all different kinds of screws for mounting fans, for mounting hard drives, and for mounting your motherboard. So all the hardware screws that we could ever need are there to the extent of this case. That's the manual, as you can see, very helpful. So we'll just set that over there. And what else do we have here? Oh, I'm going to go ahead and install the mechanical hard drive right now. And you can see there are lots of bays for me to install that. That whole front is nothing but hard drive bays. I think there's, well, from looking at it now, it looks like we've got 4 of them. I'd swear there was more than that, but this was filmed quite a while ago. I've had taken some time here to do the post-production on it, and so watching the playback here and doing the play-by-play is a little bit more difficult because of the time that's passed, but that's all right. I'm going to now get the screws ready to mount the hard drive into one of the hard drive bays, and the hard drive mounts using the screws on the bottom of the drive. So typically hard drives have mounting holes on the bottom and on the sides. Usually on these hard drive bays, they use the screws on the sides only. But NZXT, I guess, went a different direction with this, probably to
if you use the wrong screws, if the screws aren't flush, completely flush with the metal, then the tray will not slide into the case properly. The screws will prevent that from happening. So by using the screws on the bottom, you don't run into that problem regardless of whether or not your screws fit flush or not. And there's enough space between the drives that it still doesn't make any difference. The heads on the screws simply won't be that big. So I've got the other drive bay out now, and I guess now I'm going to put in, what am I doing? I'm grabbing, oh, there's an NZXT sticker that'll make that computer go faster. Now we've got our solid state drive. And of course, prepping the case is always the same, right? I'm installing the power supply, I'm installing any storage, and the motherboard's I/O shield. That's always the case prep. That's always the first thing I do. You'll notice Samsung does not ship their solid state drives in an anti-static bag, which is wonderful because they're completely useless, unnecessary, waste of money for both the consumer and the manufacturer, and not good for the ecosystem. So it's one less thing to go into the landfill. Of course, as I've mentioned in other videos, nothing we're handling in the case prep is sensitive to any electrostatic discharge. So wearing an electrostatic discharge or an ESD strap is unnecessary, but if you want to wear one, it's not going to hurt anything either. So now I'm going to just go ahead and get that solid state drive mounted, and it's the same thing. It's going to mount with the screws on the bottom. The only difference is that's usually how solid state drives do mount into hard drive trays. In every case I've seen, they mount on the bottom, and the reason for that is because the sides of the trays do not move in or out. So if they're designed to fit either 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch drives, typically the 3.5 inch larger drives use the screws on the sides, and the 2.5 inch have no choice since it can't reach the distance of 3.5 inches on each side. You use the screws on the bottom. It's nice that NZXT made the process consistent and that whether it's a 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch drive, it still mounts from the bottom, and I just like that consistency. So I think that's a really good idea. I understand why they did it. If you watch the other builds I've used where there are drive caddies like that, usually the rails are they're quite a bit thick. They're thick enough for the screws to go into the sides and then to recess so that the rail still exceeds the height of the screw, so it doesn't interfere with inserting or removing the drive caddy. So this makes the drive caddy a little bit thinner, a little bit lighter, I suppose. But I will say the other impressive thing is most drive caddies are plastic, and you sort of bend them and you can have a toolless design, which is nice. You can pull the drive caddy, replace your drive, you don't need any tools. So the downside of this design is you will need tools to change your drives out. There's a screw that holds the caddy in place, which I'm putting in, and then the 4 screws that hold the hard drive in the caddy. So there's pros and cons to this, depending on what you think is best for you, or it's a price you pay for the looks of that case. So I'm on the fence about it. I can see the value in it, and it's just a different way of doing things, and I'm all for different. All right, so it looks like I'm figuring out how that power supply is going to go in here. It looks like there's a frame that's got to be removed first, and the frame's going to come off, and then you attach the frame to the power supply, and then the power supply just slides in. So here we've got the 850 watt, look at that size of that owner's manual. It's thicker than the case of the motherboard manual for power supply. It is modular, so we got all our modular cables, power cables. There's some more, there's mounting screws. There's some more nylon zip ties in there. And then, of course, there's the power supply. Now this one is semi-modular, as you can tell. There are 2 cables attached to it permanently. Those are your motherboard power cables. And the logic behind that, of course, is that every motherboard needs those 2 cables. So why make them modular if you're going to need them anyway? Well, the reason some people prefer fully modular is if you ever have to replace the power supply and you replace it with the same manufacturer or preferably the same model, you only need to unplug all the cables from the back of the power supply, and then remove power supply, put your new one in, plug the cables back in. You don't have to undo any of your wire management and completely reroute your motherboard power and your CPU power cable because they're attached to the power supply. So when you remove it, those have to come out too. And depending on how you did your wire management, that may not be a big deal or it may be a huge deal. So now I'm just, again, going to mount the frame onto the power supply. I do like this design a little better than on the Corsair cases where you've got that little lip that the power supply goes underneath and then you push the power supply back. That's a little bit tricky. Sometimes it can be hard to align. With the frame, that's so much easier to just align the frame to the holes on the power supply and then secure the frame down, and then you just slide the whole power supply into the back of the case and then re-secure the frame back to the case. I think that's a much better design. And the other thing that's great about that is usually you'll see me do everything from one side of the computer. If you're looking at the computer head on, it's usually the left side. And that's usually where you go in and do all your work. It's possible, apart from unplugging the cables from the back of a fully modular power supply, that you can change this power supply. Well, I suppose you're still going to have to take the side panel off, but it's just a completely different process going in from the back rather than going in from the side. So therein is the last screw that's going to mount the power supply, and we still have that I/O shield to get. I don't know what I'm looking for here. I'm just kind of evaluating where the cables are coming out and how they're going to route. Cable management on this could be better. That little area under there, I guess, is a good place to hide a bunch of stuff, but I just like everything to be organized, seen or unseen. Okay, so what am I doing now? Motherboard prep. Very good. So here's the Maximus VIII Hero, which is a great motherboard. Really like it. The Core i7 and our RAM is all right there. And see if I can get this lined up so you guys can see it. There we go. I think we're in camera shot now. And let's open it up and see what it looks like in the box. I know there's got to be an I/O shield in there. I thought I would have put that in by now. No, there's the I/O shield sitting in the box. Okay. We're going to have to put that in. Come back to that since I didn't do the order right. Look at it. Not just one, not two, but 3 Go Faster stickers. So that's going to go triply fast. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Well, I don't know. Super, super fast stickers right there. Lots of them. SATA cables. Lots of SATA cables. Looks like we've got 6 of them. Driver disk and software for the motherboard. We're going to build on the motherboard box here, so we'll just fold that down, and that's going to be our bench. We'll get that plastic out of the way, get the motherboard out of its box, and sometimes that'd be a little tricky. I don't want to touch any of the metal on the motherboard. I want to hold it by its edges or anything that's plastic and the edge together. We'll lift that out, get rid of that box, set it on top. All right. Try and give you what I think will be the best angle for you to see this. It's a little difficult to operate the camera and do the work at the same time. And here's our CPU. That's the first thing that's going to go in. Here's the unboxing. There's the instructions with another Go Faster sticker there on the back. Get that, just set it gently over there. Somebody stuck some advertising in there that has no business being in there. That's pretty tricky. So this is what happens sometimes when you buy parts from different vendors. This did not come from Newegg. Where he got the CPU, the vendor stuck paper down inside of it as an advertisement, which I think is just classless. The CPU was completely sealed. The box had never been opened, so they just like stuck a leaflet, that little tiny leaflet, inside of the box. And I don't know. I mean, there's not enough advertising. I need more stuff to throw away. Just find that to be, well, let's just say there's a reason why that's not normal. All right, so we've got the CPU holding it by the edges. We want all the writing facing the same direction. That's how we know what direction the CPU goes in. The writing on the CPU will face the same direction as the writing on the motherboard. There are also 2 notches that ensure it only goes in one way. The socket is very delicate. You just set the CPU in there gently, close the lid down, remove that plastic remove the plastic cover, but keep it, because if you ever have to send the motherboard back, you need to cover that back up. Another Go Faster sticker for our RAM. I hope you have a big case to have the real estate to put on all the stickers these manufacturers naively think you want and that you're going to place on your computer to give them free advertising. And your gorgeous computer that you've color coordinated is now going to be covered with multiple colors, shapes, sizes, and even properties of the or material of the stickers. So the NZXT sticker was metal. That G.SKILL sticker is plastic. It's in the same kind of shape and design as the Intel sticker for the CPU, but the Intel sticker is narrower and a completely different color. So I have seen people who just slap stickers on their computer, but these aren't people who have a lot of pride in the aesthetics of their machine. So I don't know what manufacturers are thinking when they do this. It's a waste of money, it's a waste of resources, and when people do put them on, they're often put on with a bunch of other stickers, and it just gets lost in a maze of chaos of different colors, shapes, sizes, and materials that is very unpleasant to the eye. It's sort of like a race car, right? You see all the stickers on a race car, and they're all different fonts and different colors in a lot of cases. Some of them are dwarfed by other larger advertising on the car. There's our RAM installed. And, this is a kind of a quick build video I'm doing. There are certainly much more detailed build videos that I've done, but because of my schedule right now, I just have to kind of push these out as quickly as I can. So if this is the first build video of mine you've watched, I'm going to recommend you go and watch a different one for all the details. All right, we got thumbs up that's as far as we can go with motherboard prep because we're using a liquid cooler. There is no cooler to put on. All right, now it looks like I'm going to put the I/O shield in. And of course, putting the I/O shield in is one of the easiest parts you could ever install. And the great thing is you don't get to pick that part. It comes with your motherboard, and what you get, you get. I kind of wish it was black on the back. It looks like it's just all silver. It does kind of reflect the black from the sides, so I guess it kind of becomes the color of the case in that way, but I just think a black I/O shield is the way they should all be, because regardless of the color of the case, black will always work. Looks like we've got another twist tie. This thing is just loaded with twist ties, and I got to get all those twist ties out of there. They're just too dangerous to keep in the case. They break off. Over time, they get brittle, they break, they start rolling around inside your computer. If they fall loose, they can cause a short and completely ruin your whole system. Now, I'm going to attempt to put this motherboard in with the case facing upright. This is not the recommended way to do it. I'm only doing it because I want to give you the best angle because the camera's on. This makes the job more difficult. And of course, with that fan being in the way, and plus the I/O shroud on this motherboard, and the fan cable is in the way, and then lining up the ports with the I/O shield while it's all upright is much more difficult than laying the case flat and letting gravity help you line that motherboard up. So again, I want to emphasize this is one of the steps that I do differently on camera than I would do if I were just building it and nobody was watching. And the whole reason is just so you can see what I'm doing. So maybe one of these days I can get an overhead camera or something and we'll be able to switch to that, but I'm not quite there yet. So in this example, this would not be how I would recommend that you install your motherboard. It is, like I said, a much more difficult process. Now there is a standoff that has a little post on it that'll go through one of the motherboard mounting holes, which is traditionally in the middle, and it will hold the motherboard into position once we get it into position, if I can get it into position. And you'll see the struggle I'm having, and I'm checking the back of the I/O shield to make sure that all the ports are lining up and going through the holes properly, because it feels to me that the motherboard is not sitting flush. So now I have no choice. I have to lay it down, despite my best effort to give you guys a view. It's occurring to me that this is not working out very well. Time is ticking and it's taking too long. So now I'm trying to figure out why the motherboard is not sitting flush. It's just not lining up properly, and I can't figure out why. And it may have to do with that I/O shield hitting the side of the fan. It might be easier if I take that fan out. And you don't want to use any force on any of these computer parts. Things should fit rather easily. It does look like something finally seated, and I'm satisfied with that. And now I'm putting the screws in to secure the board into position. And I'm sorry I can't give you a better angle of it, but at least now I'm doing it the way I would recommend that you do it, and that is to lay the case down on its side, just as I'm showing. And if you want to see how the motherboard mounts, again, you can check out numerous other build videos I've done where I've got camera close-ups for all the screws. And each motherboard manufacturer in each case often have a different layout. They all follow the ATX form factor, or whatever board you're using. If you're using a micro ATX or a mini ITX or an ATXE, they follow the formats that's allowed, which can be a variety of different patterns. So this one's using the standard, I believe the 9-hole pattern, which is pretty standard for ATX motherboards, but I just want you to be aware they may all not be the same, and you want to use every mounting hole you've got, and you just want to make sure there are no standoffs before you begin that are going to align where you can't see it behind the back of the motherboard, and it'll short your motherboard out and potentially cause your system to fail. So in this case, the standoffs didn't have to be moved. Everything was standard. The case came pre-installed with the standoffs we needed in the right place for motherboards like this. So that's nice, where you don't have to modify any of the standoffs. But again, depending on what case you use and what motherboard you use, that may not always be the circumstance. Now that's what the motherboard looks like mounted into the case. And next, it looks like we can start our wiring. Okay, now that we've got the motherboard mounted in position, we can hook up the front port umbilical cables now, and that's going to start by me removing the wire tie that's holding all those front port umbilical cables up against the side of the case, and then untangling those cables, which my back is at the camera there, so it's hard to see what I'm doing, so I'm going to just kind of skip forward a bit here on this video, and we'll go right to the point where I've got all this stuff untangled. Here we go. And at this point now, it's hooking up the, well, I can't see, obviously. And then again, you could see that Lazy Susan's just a little bit too small. It just barely fits that case. I need a much bigger one. But at this point, I'm going to hook up the probably, it's hard for me to see what I'm doing here, but you know, the front port umbilicals involve the front USB, the front power switch and reset switch, the front power LED and hard drive LED, and the front audio, which is headphones and microphone jack up on the front of the case. And so we just hook these up one at a time, and with the camera in a static position and me standing in front of it, there's not a very good view here for you. So I'm going to go ahead and just skip through this part. You've seen me do this dozens of times in many of my other more comprehensive videos. They all pretty much go in the same place. You can see I don't need to use the owner's manual at all. The board not only is etched on the circuit board of where the cables go, but because I'm using consistently the same brands of motherboards, typically I'm using Gigabyte and Asus, I know where to expect those cables to go. So people often ask me about other brands of motherboards and why I don't use them, and it comes down to support. And well, if you're just buying one computer and building one computer, it may not matter which brand of motherboard you buy. When you're building as many as I'm building, you're more likely to run into a problem. And if you have that problem, you don't want the company giving you excuses or being hard to reach when you've got a customer waiting, because the customer doesn't see the company, they see you. And if you're taking a long time, then they may decide that you are no longer a good fit for them because you don't respond fast enough, or you don't get the problem resolved in a expedient enough manner. So I like to use parts that I can rely on, that have a reputation for not breaking, and in the rare circumstance when they do break, that the manufacturer is easy to reach and gets me a solution very quickly, as painlessly as possible. So if you notice there are some brands you don't see on my channel, there is a reason behind that. And rather than talk poorly about any brands, I'd rather not do that. I'd rather just simply showcase the brands that I support. And you will see the same brands over and over and over again. And that's why I have the same customers coming back to me years later asking me to build them another computer, because the customers appreciate that build quality. And so that's why when people say, hey, can you build a $500 computer? The answer is no, because I cannot give them that kind of support. I can't stand behind that product. It's more likely to fail. And when it fails, the support is often non-existent, and it's often cheaper for me and faster for me to simply buy a new motherboard for that customer to get them up and running as quickly as possible. So if people were wondering why. So it looks like I've got the front port umbilicals hooked up and hooking up the large 24-pin power connector on the motherboard now. And of course, you're going to hook that power connector up on every single motherboard ever made. Needs that 24-pin power connector, specifically a modern motherboard, one made within the last 10 years. And that's going to snap on. And I want to reemphasize that if this is the first build video that you're seeing for me, this is not the video for you. You should be watching one of my more comprehensive build videos where I have detailed close-ups and full explanations as to the logic and the reasoning why I'm doing things the way I'm doing them. The reason I'm filming this video in this manner is simply because I'm trying to get this computer done in a hurry. I've got a lot of computers waiting to be built, and I'd like to film all of them, but it may not be possible given the time it takes to do all of this by myself. And the end result is that we have, I end up with videos that are of varying design. In other words, I don't want to make the same video over and over and over again. So this is a different way of showing you in more or less real time how long it actually takes me to build the computer versus breaking it down and having to, like for example, when I speak to the camera and I say something wrong or there's an interruption, I have to stop filming and I have to start all over again. So by doing it this way, I'm able to just work without speaking, without if there's interruptions, I can stop the camera, nobody knows. And it's just another format, just for the sake of experimenting with different ways of showing you the process. So what I've done now is I've grabbed all the modular cables that have come included with our power supply. And I'm going to hook up that CPU power, which again is going to be required on all modern motherboards. And that goes in that upper left corner. It's always in that upper left corner on all boards. You'll see there's a small hole cut out in the top back of the case there. And when you're running your cables, a lot of people ask me to do a video about cabling, but that would be virtually impossible. And the reason for that is there's no right or wrong way to do cabling. You have to look at it and you have to decide what looks good to you. You have to not be a robot and follow what you see somebody do on YouTube. You have to use your brain and think about what's the most efficient way to run this cable. How's it going to look good? One of the ways it looks good is to untangle it, is to straighten out all the kinks and the bends out of the cable, and to find the most efficient routing to get that cable from point to point without interweaving it between other cables. Once you've done that, then you take all your excess cable and you tie it up with nylon zip ties. And those nylon zip ties, when I do it, apparently there was some reason I stopped that. I think there was an interruption. But when I do the nylon zip ties, I often have to put them on temporarily as I experiment with different cabling patterns. For example, you can't necessarily have one large big bundle keeping it all together, because oftentimes the back panel will no longer fit on. Sometimes you have to separate it out. And so depending on how many cables you've got with your power supply, whether or not your power supply is modular, how much spare cable you have, which is also an indication of how big your case is. In other words, a case that's taller is going to require longer cables. A case that's shorter is probably going to have cables that have a lot of slack. And so you need to tie those up if you want it to look good. It also makes it easier to diagnose and to repair it in the future. Right now it looks like I'm hooking up power for the drives. That's what it looks like I'm doing right now. But yeah, that's why it would be basically impossible for me to show you how to do cabling, because you would have to have exactly the same parts from the power supply to the case, and you would have to mount your hardware in exactly the same places. And that's not my goal here. My goal is not to teach anybody how to be a robot. My goal is to explain to you why I'm doing what I'm doing, so that you're actually educated and you understand the logic, so that you can figure out unique situations that suit you, rather than just making a clone of what I'm doing. So I hope that explains that. And it's not practical to show how to cable, because again, it's going to vary on every single case. So one of the struggles I'm having with this case, for example, is the power supply is very difficult for me to see and get into, because of that, the way they've kind of boxed it out from the front of the computer, from the other side. And on this side, it's a big mess of cables, and it's dark and it's hard to see in there. So I had to get the flashlight out to look in there, and then I had to be careful when I ran that cable not to interweave it with all the other cables. There's fan cables or the front umbilical port cables. And here's the thing, if I do interweave it, then after I've done my test boot and everything works, when it comes time to clean up the cables, I'm going to have to unplug those cables and reroute them before I can do the cable management and make it look good. So I hope that's enough information on the cable management for you guys. Okay, I've thrown an edit in here because you can see I put the flashlight away, and now I'm going to install the SATA cables. I had just pulled those out of the motherboard box, and let's face it, you guys don't need to watch that. So now it's just a matter of hooking the SATA data cables up to the hard drive and the solid state drive. Remember, it's one cable per drive. If you have 4 drives, you need 4 cables. If you have 2 drives, you need 2 cables. It's pretty simple, really, because there's only one connector at each end of the cable. One end goes to the hard drive and one end goes to the motherboard. The maximum number of hard drives or solid state drives or optical drives or any other kind of drive or anything that requires a SATA cable is limited strictly by the motherboard that you purchase, that you decide to buy. If your motherboard has 10 SATA cables, then you can have up to 10 drives. I did have to reference the motherboard manual. That's something else I cut out in determining which of the SATA ports on this specific motherboard was SATA 0. I find that's much easier on gigabyte boards to determine. I don't have to look at the manual, but on the Asus boards I find it confusing. They often have a little sticker on one pair of the SATA connectors on the motherboard that says hook your boot drive here. And it's something I've discussed with Asus that I find very confusing, and again, no other manufacturer does that. So while you do see me throw the manuals around a bit, because let's face it, they aren't very helpful in this industry, you will see me use them as references. Specifically, the most often times I use them is when I'm trying to figure out which RAM sockets to use, if I'm only using 2 RAM modules, but I've got 4 sockets, you should not assume that the RAM modules go in the first 2 sockets. Asus has taught me that because they do it in a way that is illogical to anybody but an engineer. And the other thing I'll use it for, and again, dealing strictly with Asus, is determining which of the SATA ports is SATA 0. Usually by looking on the board, you can see what it says etched on the board. But Asus does it in a way that's very, very confusing. It's anti-user friendly. It's almost like Asus makes motherboards by engineers for engineers, and that average consumers are just not even considered. Like the way a normal non-engineer type person thinks never occurs to the folks at Asus. And while I try to explain this to Asus, explaining it to an engineer is frustrating because, well, there's an old expression, you don't know what you don't know. And since engineers cannot fathom, well, I won't say all of them, but in my experience, they can't understand, or they refuse to understand, how regular people think, because to them it's not logical. And they will fight for their logic rather than just listening to what an average consumer is telling them and saying, hey, thank you for letting me know that, and we'll adjust it accordingly. And they will say, for example, that the people who buy our boards simply don't make those kind of complaints. And it's like, well, maybe that's because the people who buy your boards are part of your choir, and you're preaching to the choir, or they're preaching to you, and you're all on the same page. So if you want other people to buy your boards, like regular non-engineer types, and you want to be consumer friendly so that anybody can do this, you need to address these issues. And I really feel like that conversation falls on deaf ears, and I get nowhere with them. So until Asus finally acknowledges that non-technical people think a different way and adjust their techniques, you and me both are going to have to refer to that motherboard manual in order to determine where RAM and SATA ports are with Asus products. And this isn't a problem I have, like I said, with Gigabyte, and I don't use any other manufacturers of boards. Those are the only 2 I will use because they're very, very good. It's just on the side of what I would call common sense, Asus, in my opinion, fails and are strictly engineers that expect other people to adapt to them instead of them adapting to their customer. And they will justify it because most of their customers are technical people. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to be a technical person. This stuff is all very, very simple. And from time to time, you may have to open a motherboard manual as a reference to just verify what's not clear. And if there's any manufacturer that things are not clear, it's Asus. But that's not to say their products are not good. Obviously, if I didn't think their products were good, I wouldn't be using them. This is strictly a labeling and a design failure, in my opinion, that would be easily addressed. So with me off my soapbox on that topic,
release the Kraken.
I have released the Kraken. Yes, it's time to install the liquid cooler. When you take the liquid cooler out of the box, now this is a closed loop liquid cooler. And what that means is everything is, the liquid is already in it, it's all sealed, there's nothing to leak. Usually when people create their own custom liquid cooler loops, you basically have to be a plumber, and that's why you don't see me create custom liquid cooler loops. I'm not a plumber. This is also a lot faster and a lot easier, and it's going to statistically last longer, especially if it's your very first time installing a liquid cooler. These closed loop liquid coolers are very, very easy to install compared to an open loop or a custom liquid cooler. And you notice I'm calling it a liquid cooler and not a water cooler. And that's another important distinction because it's not water that does the cooling. It's a mixture of It's like a car. It's not just antifreeze and it's not just distilled water. It's a mixture of both. So these liquid coolers have a chemical that has water in it, but it's blended with other things that basically raise the boiling point of the water so that it can get hotter and make it cool more efficiently. And you can see there's already thermal compound applied on the bottom of the water block. And the water block is the part that's going to attach to the base of the CPU, the top of the CPU. So one of the things that cracks me up is I have these videos posted where I explain how manufacturers quite often have thermal compound already applied to the heatsink or to the water block. And a viewer will either skip through the video, and you know they're skipping through the video based on the comments they leave. And there's an old expression that it's best to be ignorant and keep your mouth shut than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. So people will post these comments basically saying, hey, look at how ignorant I am. I watched your video, but I want to know why you didn't put any thermal compound on. Which is basically just shouting to the world, I'm ignorant. And you're better off not doing that, in my opinion, unless that's what you want the world to think. And it's frustrating to me because I'm an educator, and I've taken the time to explain this. And over and over and over and over and over again, where's the thermal compound? Why no thermal compound? And I have to respond to them with a time mark in the YouTube video, basically to this point where I'm talking and going, would you please tell me what I said? And then I often get an apology. You know, sorry, I didn't hear that the first time. Well, probably the reason you didn't hear it the first time is you were jumping through the video. One of the things you can tell with YouTube analytics is how long your average view is. So for example, you might have an average view of 3 minutes. So even though my videos are an hour, hour and a half long, if an average view time of 3 minutes, that's telling me people are jumping and skipping. And when they do that, you're only hurting yourself. It doesn't bother me. You can jump and skip through all the videos you want. You're the one denying yourself the education. The thing is you don't know what you don't know. And if you skip through, you're assuming you already know this stuff. Well, if you already know this stuff, why watch it? You don't get to skip through the parts. You're like, well, I already did that part on my case. Well, maybe you didn't do it right. You should watch it to verify. So there's another expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I'm here offering the information for free. All you have to do is sit down and watch it at your convenience at no cost to you. And you can even watch it in 10-minute pieces. Wait, what am I doing? I have got, I don't know what that was. It looks like, I'm not sure. The camera didn't focus. One of the other things I do is I turn the autofocus off on the camera so that the focus won't keep shifting. And it's one of the things I have to do because I don't have a camera operator. But anyway, mounting the liquid cooler is a little more complicated than mounting a stock cooler. And I really don't believe you need a liquid cooler unless you plan to overclock your computer. Now that takes me into something else, which is there's a lot of people on the internet that think they can teach without any experience because they Googled something. And they will not hesitate to offer their opinion or to correct or attempt to correct the process in which I demonstrate building a computer, even though they have zero experience ever having done it. And they justify correcting me because of some other YouTube video they saw. And they assume, I'm guessing because they saw that video first, that that's the right way. So again, it's another little bit of frustration when dealing with the public. And I realize when I put these videos out there, I'm opening myself up to this type of uneducated, unexperienced criticism from people who think they know what they don't know. And I'm just explaining this to you because, well, I encourage everybody to build your own computer. I think everybody should do it. It's a great experience. What I don't encourage you to do necessarily is to make a YouTube video about it unless you have very thick skin and you're ready to hear criticism from people who have no idea what they're talking about because they've looked at Wikipedia, watched some YouTube videos, and think they have all the answers. When you actually do something and you gain the experience from doing it, and preferably more than once. Although once is pretty good, but after you've done it, let's say 10 or 15 or 20 times, then you've got different experience, different cases, different motherboards. Then you can offer your advice to others. Not based on what you read or what you saw somebody on YouTube do. And I don't intend for my videos to be a replacement for your experience. My videos are intended to encourage you to have your own experience and then to share that experience in the comments. Like, for example, what part was harder than you thought it would be? What part was easier than you thought it would be? Things like that. And then that information helps me to make those clarifications in future videos to others, because the more experience you have, the harder it is to remember what it was like the very first time you did it and where your concerns were. A lot of people say, for example, I want to build my own computer, but I'm afraid I'll screw it up. Well, that's what my videos are for. They're there to give you that confidence. And you shouldn't be afraid to fail. Failing, FAIL, is just a first attempt in learning. That's all it is. Now, if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, well, we've got a problem. But if you can do nothing more than follow my example, you will succeed. But if you're going to skip through the video, if you think you already know all this stuff, then you don't need to be watching this and go off and build your own computer. But it is amazing to me how many videos that I see where people will say, here's a computer for $700 you can build. And then they just show the parts from links on Amazon, and that's their video. They don't actually build it. There are people who talk about thermal compound. They have some sort of weird mental issue with thermal compound. And the bottom line is thermal compound is important, but the type of thermal compound you use and how you apply it, that's really up to you. And it's funny to me that people are so passionate about the type of thermal compound, and they're very passionate about how it's applied. And I've demonstrated in other videos that if you take the heat shield off of the CPU that you're so concerned about your thermal compound, there is a thermal compound under it that's applied by Intel or AMD, depending on who you're using. And it's just the cheapest thermal compound that's slapped on there. It's sloppy. And so while people are so nitpicky over their thermal compound on top of the CPU, it never occurs to them about the thermal compound that's underneath that heat shield and how crappy it is. And they talk about air bubbles, and they talk about just the silliest things. Like some guy on YouTube put a video, it's just funny to me, put a video of a piece of glass going over a CPU to demonstrate air bubbles, little tiny microscopic air bubbles that appear on the CPU. And he doesn't apply the glass with the same amount of pressure, of equal pressure, that the heatsink actually applies when it's locked in place, and nor does he turn the computer on for the heat then to melt the thermal compound. It's not an airtight system, folks, and those air bubbles make absolutely no difference whatsoever in your cooling, not even 1 degree centigrade in one direction or the other, unless you are an extreme overclocker and you're using nitrogen and you're trying to break some world record. It's humorous to me. So getting back to the liquid cooler, you'll see I'm mounting the radiator right now up here on the top. I've got the fans installed the way Corsair recommends, which is to blow air out of the case, out through the top of the case. So we want to take air from inside and blow it out. And that's called a push configuration. We are pushing air out of the case, through the radiator, and out through the top. You can also have what's called a push-pull configuration, where you have fans on both sides of the radiator, the fans working in the same direction. So as 2 fans are blowing air, 2 fans are pulling it. And that helps bring more air through the radiator, which helps cool it. But I will say this. Unless you're going to overclock your CPU, which means you have to buy a CPU, at least from Intel, with the K designation, then you don't need a liquid cooler. So you have to buy a K CPU. But you also need to know that you can buy a K CPU and a standard cooler, and it'll still run about 10 to 20% faster than the non-K version of the same CPU. Just look at the specifications of an Intel 4790, let's say Core i7 4790 or 6770 versus a 4790K or 6770K. Look it up yourself. I'm not going to tell you. I want you to look it up. Just buying the K version gets you a boost in performance without any overclocking whatsoever. A boost that's equivalent to overclocking the non-K version. But with the K version, you can then overclock it further. Now, the problem with discussing this is then there becomes a group of YouTube viewers that go, well, what's overclocking? So it's a very delicate place to walk when you're trying to instruct people, that you get sidetracked by the experts who are policing your videos, the people who think they know everything but have no actual experience, and those that these videos are intended for, which are people that have a computer and are curious about building one themselves. It seems intimidating, it seems scary, but it is always cheaper to build your own computer. There is a sense of accomplishment. There's a chemical that's released in your brain. It's like an adrenaline. I don't know what it is, but it's better than any drug I've ever had. Not that I've had a lot, but I'm just telling you. I cannot explain the feeling that you get. But when you build it, you and I will then share something that we know that others who have never built a computer don't know. And that's that feeling. And when you get that feeling, you're going to want that feeling again. Just like a really good drug, you're going to want to build another one. And the thing that cracks me up is when people say, I am so afraid of building a computer. My philosophy on that is, what are you afraid of? You're afraid you might break it. You're afraid it may not work. I hope you do break it, and I hope it doesn't work the first time you turn it on, because that will force you to learn something. You will be forced to figure it out. You will be forced to go to Google forums, and you will be forced to ask for help, or you will just do your own research and you will figure it out. That is when you learn. By watching videos on YouTube, by reading things on the internet, all you're doing is gaining information, but you're not actually putting it into practice. And that's why I say experience is so much more important. You can read all about how to do an appendicitis operation, but if you've never performed an appendicitis, you shouldn't be telling people how to do it any more than what I'm doing. But unfortunately, the internet is the internet, and people have the best of intentions. And people with the best of intentions have pretty much paid for my house. So I shouldn't complain about it. But I have to tell you that I find it very humorous that people will fight for their ignorance. So don't let fear be the reason why you're not going to do it, because if you build a computer and you do it exactly the way I show you and everything works perfectly the first time you turn it on, all you did was verify what you already knew. When it doesn't work the first time you turn it on, like someone will say, I did everything right, but it doesn't work. Well, clearly you didn't do everything right, or you got a bad part. But I have to tell you, I have not received a single bad part in over 6 years. I haven't received a bad motherboard, I haven't received bad RAM, I haven't received a bad power supply. Everything I have received in the last 6 years has worked out of the box. I have had a couple things fail over time. One of the cheap EVGA 430 watt CPUs failed about 6 weeks after I delivered it to a customer. And I continue to use those little cheap EVGA 430 watt power supplies because one bad one out of, I don't know, 30, that's not a bad ratio. That's not a big deal. That will happen from time to time. You may have a UPS driver or a delivery driver in your neighborhood who likes to drop kick boxes to your front door. Now, that's not the manufacturer's fault or the vendor's fault. The damage may be occurring in that last mile to your house. So keep that in mind if you do have a DOA part, DOA meaning dead on arrival. It may have been bad, it may have been good all the way through the process, and it may be your shipper who caused it. And perhaps try a different shipper. In other words, if you're finding a lot of dead items coming from UPS, then select a different shipping option. Select FedEx or DHL or the USPS, whatever it may be. But keep that in mind, please. So here you see I've removed that plastic cover that's protecting the thermal compound that's pre-applied on that water block. And now it's time to secure that down on top of the CPU. And I've got to tell you, I really, really like these NZXT Kraken liquid coolers much more than the Corsairs. The tubes, the liquid tubes, are thinner and more flexible, and they are on a pivot. And on Corsair's H line of, the H100, H110, etc., their H line of liquid coolers, the liquid cooler lines are thick and they're not very flexible, and they are locked into the CPU, the water block, so they don't move. So NZXTs, I like that they swivel and you can kind of move them and adjust them. Not a lot, but it makes a difference. And you don't have to fight with it so much when you get it installed because the cables aren't so stiff. So I predict you're going to see me use a lot more NZXT liquid coolers and fewer Corsair liquid coolers. So right now I'm simply securing the water block onto the CPU, and this isn't something you really can over tighten. If you over tighten it, what's going to happen is you're going to break I've done this before. You can break the screw off. That's why I'm using a mechanical screwdriver and not an electric screwdriver. Using my electric screwdriver, I actually torqued it so tight I snapped the bolt. And it was a Corsair unit, and I emailed Corsair and they sent me new bolts for free. So it did delay my build a little bit. I learned a lesson from it, and I know not to do that anymore. And that's why it's important when I buy parts that I choose a manufacturer that's going to support me. And even though that wasn't Corsair's fault, it wasn't a defect in workmanship or materials, I'm the one who screwed up. They covered me, they had my back. And so for that reason, I will continue to buy their parts, specifically their cases and their RAM and things like that. And with NZXT, I haven't had any issues yet to have to contact support, but doing the research I did, the support looked like it was good, and when and if that day comes where I contact them, I'll let you know how it was. And I assure you, if they don't have my back, even if I think their liquid cooler is easier to install, I will go back to Corsair strictly for support. The other thing I wanted to mention about liquid coolers is some people say liquid coolers run quieter than just having a fan. But when you have a liquid cooler, you go from having one fan to having two fans. Well, I guess it depends on the size of the liquid cooler. So like on this build, this liquid cooler has two fans attached to the radiator. If we would have installed a traditional heatsink fan, that would just be one fan. So we're not getting rid of the fans. They are larger fans, and larger fans spin slower and move more air and are therefore quieter. But if your concern is about quiet, I wouldn't be thinking about a liquid cooler for that reason, because they can ramp up and they can get really, really hot. And as they heat up, the fans move faster and it will create noise. Instead, you should buy a case that has soundproofing in it that's designed to be quiet. Then you don't have that issue. So again, we run into people on the internet offering this advice, oh, you gotta have a liquid cooler, you gotta have a liquid cooler. I think it's very rare anybody needs a liquid cooler. Clearly, if you don't have a K CPU, you don't need it. If you have a non-K Intel-based CPU and noise is an issue, buy a sound and a sound dampening case. It'll cost you less money, be less work, and will result in an overall quieter computer with a stock CPU fan. So that comes from experience. 25 years I've been doing this, and I'm just sharing my knowledge with you of 25 years of experience. So I want you to keep that in mind before you correct me, unless you are willing to say what your first and last name is and have a verifiable background in building computers, and you want to correct me, then I would be very interested in what you have to say. Otherwise, I'm going to let my experience replace your opinion, because I'm a scientific guy and I'm only interested in what I know for fact. So that's not to say that I haven't had viewers teach me things. In fact, viewers have taught me quite a bit, especially when it came to installing a liquid cooler. I was doing that completely the hard way. So, but when people tell me, in general, when people tell me things I'm doing are wrong, they have no clue what they're talking about. So in many cases, I've considered shutting the comments off on YouTube because they cause me the most frustration. If you can't tell, it's all I've been talking about, right? But I want to emphasize that the majority of comments are very flattering, and I do appreciate them. And it's just something that comes along with being on YouTube. And so if you're considering starting a YouTube channel, be prepared for that, because people can be very, very nasty. But despite those people, we march forward, and I explain to you what some of the obstacles are I face and what some of my frustrations are as a creator, in the hopes that you have a greater appreciation for not only the time and the money and the effort it takes to make these videos, but then the trolls that come out and want to stir things up. So for the most part, those comments do get deleted. I like to create a community where everybody supports each other, and if somebody has a suggestion of a way of doing something more efficiently, or if I'm perhaps installing something wrong, which happens, that people put that in a nice way, just as I do here in my videos, as I set the example I'd like others to follow. Now you can see here I had to go back to the motherboard manual in order to look up some information. And I haven't been talking much about the build because, quite frankly, again, I want to reemphasize this, I have covered builds in great detail, and this one was intended to strictly be just sort of a real-time build process. And you can see I'm putting things away and organizing my work area, keeping my work area clean. And I think that's where we're going to stop this part here. Oh, I know what I was checking. I was checking to see what a water. When you have a liquid cooler, some motherboards have a header, a motherboard header, designed for the water block. And Asus is one of those manufacturers that does that. And while you do not necessarily have to plug the water block into the water block power header, it's there for a reason and you should use it. So again, we're going to stop here and we'll continue on with the next part as I finish putting things away in the motherboard box and prepping up for the next part in the series. All right, now I'm ready to do my first test boot to make sure that all the work that I've done so far is working before I go any further. So I need to use the onboard video that's on the, well, it's on the motherboard and on the CPU, and it requires an HDMI cable. And on my test monitor here, you'll notice I always keep a VGA and a DVI cable connected to it. I rarely use the HDMI because I work on a lot of different machines, and more often than not, I need that VGA or that DVI cable. A lot of older systems don't have the HDMI output. So, but the monitor does have that capability. I just plug it in when I need it. And of course, I plugged in the wireless dongle for the keyboard and mouse, and then the power was last. I'm going to flip the switch to the power supply on and then hit the button on the computer case. You'll see we've got lights and fans spinning, which is a good sign. Always remember that on your first boot, you need to be patient. It may take a minute for everything to initialize. So if things don't appear right away, give it a good 60 or 90 seconds. So finally, we're getting some graphics here. I'm inspecting the front fans, making sure they're all spinning. I'm going to make sure the CPU fan is spinning. There's a switch on the back of the case that I'm playing with, and you'll see it's adjusting the brightness of the lights. So that is working. Just did it one more time for fun. Now, normally, the screen that comes up, that's your first power on, and again here I'm just making sure all the fans are spinning. Normally there's really nothing here that's of any useful information since we don't have our operating system installed, and there's going to be error messages here that it can't boot, which is perfectly normal. I think this screen has that extra bit of text there on the bottom that kind of threw me off. So with that done, I can move on to the next step, which, what is the next step? It looks like I'm going to flash the BIOS. That's a lot of people have questions about why I do that. The latest BIOS is designed to resolve problems that earlier BIOSes had. Some people believe that you shouldn't update the BIOS unless you need it. I believe that you should update the BIOS so that you don't need it, if that makes any sense. Instead of waiting for a problem to occur, by having the latest BIOS, not the beta BIOS, but the latest official BIOS, I can help statistically improve the odds that my customer is not going to suffer from a problem that the BIOS resolves. A lot of times when people say you shouldn't upgrade the BIOS unless you need it, that's really for systems that have already been built and you're already using it versus a brand new computer. In my opinion, a brand new computer should have the latest BIOS. Does it have to have it? Well, maybe it does and maybe it doesn't. It kind of depends on whether or not the latest BIOS fixes affect you or not, and how are you going to know that? I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you that. You may run an old BIOS and maybe you're afraid of this step, or you find this step confusing, despite the fact I have videos that show you how to do it with Asus and Gigabyte boards. The failure rate of doing it wrong is so unlikely these days. The manufacturers have pretty well nailed it down, and some manufacturers have even automated the process. So, with utilities that come on the disk with the motherboard, which takes pretty much all the risk out of it unless you lose power while the BIOS update is happening. And that's really the only way you can break the motherboard, if you will, is if you lose power when it happens. A lot of times, even if you grab the wrong BIOS, the motherboard will not let you flash it. It'll just simply say the BIOS doesn't match and won't allow you to effectively destroy it. It's not really destroying it. It's just that once the BIOS has been updated, if it's the wrong BIOS, the system won't boot anymore. And the only way you're going to be able to get the right BIOS back on it is to send the motherboard in for repair. Some manufacturers still use a socketed chip. I think Asus on some boards still use a socketed BIOS chip, and they could just mail you that new chip and you can pop it in and be back in business. Gigabyte has that dual BIOS where you can restore a previous BIOS in such an instance. So all the hazards that used to exist 20 years ago that people still warn about today really don't exist anymore today. So got to be careful who you listen to. So again, it kind of comes down to, is this a necessary step? Well, if I'm building a computer and I'm supporting that computer, I want to make sure that that computer is going to run as reliably as possible. So in my business, as a policy, that is a required procedure. When you build your own computer, that's for you to decide. But that's the logic and the reasoning behind why I do it. And if you don't agree with that, then don't do it. If you're simply afraid of it and you don't have any experience, then you have no reason to be afraid of it. If what you're afraid of is things you've read on the internet, that's great entertainment, but it has nothing to do with reality. And until you have your own experience, you won't know if that fear is justified or not. I think most people think it's a bigger risk than it really is. And like I said, it's not like you have to be a computer technician anymore to do this stuff. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And again, you just want to make sure you have the right BIOS for your motherboard. And if you're uncertain how to do that, then get some help. have somebody do it for you, or don't do it at all. It's your computer, so that's the beauty of it. You can do it any way you want. Now, this is being filmed in real time, so you can get an idea of just how long this BIOS update takes. Now, a lot of that has to do with the speed of the flash drive and the size of the BIOS itself. And obviously, I had to go to a different computer that was already built and connected to the internet to download that BIOS. But it was just as simple as typing into Google the manufacturer of the board, the model number, and the words BIOS download. And then looking for the manufacturer.com website, and then clicking on the BIOS version and comparing it to the BIOS version I have now. And if the BIOS version is a bigger number on the website than what I have, then I'm behind. And I want to make sure I have the latest one to, again, address any potential issues that the latest BIOS fixes. Now that the BIOS has been updated, I've rebooted it here. And just, again, we want to make sure the machine still works okay. I'm getting a command about, I can't really read it, maybe NT loaders missing. Oh, I'm pointing at my watch. I think it said the BIOS update had to reboot and then apply itself again or something. It was a second step. So I thought it was done, and it's like, oh no, I'm not done yet. It needed to do something, and I had to wait. So patience is really a key when you update a BIOS. Clearly it's done now, and then you can verify the BIOS version is the version you downloaded. Okay, we got that taken care of. Here I've got a retail copy of Windows 10 that comes on a USB stick. That's how Microsoft sells it. And that's just gonna, I gotta turn the computer off, plug the USB stick in. A lot of people have asked me, are you ever gonna show how to install Windows 10? Windows 10 doesn't really install any differently than Windows 8 or Windows 7, which I've already detailed in my previous videos. Basically, you plug the flash drive in, or the CD, whichever form of media you have, and you follow your on-screen prompts. So what I'm going to do at this point is just fast forward through this process. All I'm pretty much doing is clicking next and entering the product key and agreeing to the license agreement and clicking next and putting a username in. No differently than Windows 7 installs or Windows 8 installs. There's really nothing to it. Just follow what the screen, answer what the screen is asking you when it stops to ask you anything, and just keep clicking next until you're done. Now, rather than just throw an edit in here with it being done, what I'll do is just speed up the video so you can watch the entire process go by real quick. You'll see my dog Lyle poking around there. And then, of course, through the magic of video editing, it's done. Now, with our Windows 10 installation done, there's a few little tweaks I'm going to make, and you'll see I've brought out an external optical drive because this machine has no internal optical drive. I need a way to install the drivers, and I don't want to go to the website and download all of them and install them. So the first thing I'm doing is putting my customer's original Windows 10 USB installation USB stick back in its box, and that'll get put away. It'll go back in the motherboard box where the customer will have it for future needs. Our install is done now, so that can be put away. And where that was plugged in, I'm going to now plug in the external USB drive using the motherboard drivers that came with the board. Now, a lot of people believe in using the latest drivers and going to the website and downloading them, but these days driver updates aren't occurring for things like the chipset and the audio, the Ethernet, the sound. They're just not happening like they used to. So chances are your device driver disk that comes with your Asus or Gigabyte motherboard, I can't speak for other manufacturers, will already have the latest drivers on it, with the only exception being the video. But in this case, we're not using the motherboard on. We are using the onboard video for right now, setting up Windows and getting the drivers installed. I have not yet installed the NVIDIA discrete graphics card that's going to replace that. So the reason I've done it in this order really is just to ensure everything is working properly, and that all I'm going to have to do at the end is plug the video card in and then do my cable management, of course, install the drivers for that video card, and the system will be ready to be buttoned up and sent off to the customer.
Again, there's no right or wrong order. I could have gone ahead and installed the NVIDIA graphics card before beginning this process, but ultimately it results, in the same end result. So there's, like I said, many different ways of doing this, and you're welcome to do it whatever way suits you. Some people have asked how they know if the CPU they're buying has that integrated graphics chip. And all you have to do is, when you're shopping for your graphics chip, when you're shopping for your CPU, I'm getting myself all confused. When you're shopping for your CPU, if it's an Intel CPU you're looking at, it'll be under the main specifications of the CPU. It will say what the speed of the CPU is, or the frequency, how many cores it has, and whether or not it supports Intel's HD video. And if you see that it supports Intel's HD video, then it means it's got the graphics chip built onto the CPU. And that's great for regular workstation work. If you're in an office, you're doing some web browsing, you're sending emails, you're in Word documents, Excel documents, that built-in graphics chip is just fine using the onboard video. If you're a gamer, if you're playing old games, onboard video could be fine. But if you're playing the latest AAA titles, then you definitely want a discrete graphics card. So what I'm doing right now is just looking through the list of drivers, I believe, that are on the DVD that came included with the motherboard. And I don't want, they try and package nonsense like Norton Internet Security and some other stuff, and I deselect that. And then I tell it to go ahead and install just the drivers. I don't want any of the software. And so this is going to take about 10 or 15 minutes, so we'll go ahead and throw an edit here to when that's complete. Okay, now that our driver install is finally completed, I'm going to go ahead and reboot the system. And I keep the driver disk in it after the first reboot because on some systems, Windows will detect new hardware and it'll immediately go to that, look for that driver disk to install it. So it'll take just a second here while we reboot the system with the latest drivers. Give it an opportunity to grab any last thing it might want off of that DVD before we disconnect it. And at that point, we should be done with the DVD drive. Now, when we do the video card, when that gets installed, I will always download the latest driver for the video card because NVIDIA and AMD are releasing drivers like crazy, which I addressed in a previous video. And you can see on that first reboot how that little DOS window opened there. That's not something that'll happen every time we boot. That was something that occurred as a result of the driver installation. And now I can go ahead and remove that driver disk, put it back in its envelope, and then put it back in the motherboard box. And that's basically your install of Windows 10 right there. Anything else regarding customization, privacy options, things of that nature, that's really up to you to decide. There's certainly a lot of websites that describe how to turn on and off features concerning privacy or Cortana or any of that other stuff, which, again, some people don't care about and some people are very passionate about. So rather than cover that in this video, it's already been very well documented on websites like MaximumPC.com and PCWorld.com, again, that are very reputable, and you can trust the information there that can guide you through disabling those quote-unquote features. All right, now it's time to get the video card installed since we've got everything else done, right? Windows 10's installed. We've got the GeForce GTX 980 Ti. Of course, we didn't use the 1070 or 1080 or 1050 because those did not exist at the time these parts were ordered, let alone when the system got built. So, of course, by now, the customer has had the system for quite some time, and it's just taken a while to get to the video editing part. There's a free poster that comes with the video card. But basically, there's still an hour and 45 minutes left to edit, just to give you an idea of how much footage I have to go through to whittle it down for you guys. Then, of course, doing the voiceover I thought would be easier, but it's actually twice as hard because now I have to remember what it was I was doing and
And then when I make mistakes, I have to stop and edit the audio separately, and then I have to resync the audio with the video, with the audio edits and the video edits all synced up. So if there was a way of doing it the hard way, this is definitely it. But again, for the sake of just doing things differently, we're going to continue in this vein. And as you can see with the video card, as you've seen me do many times before, it's really important to get all of the plastic covering off of the card, because the card can get very hot, and that plastic can start to heat up and start to emit a really bad smell. So chances are, like the little plastic I'm removing off the NVIDIA logos, and then that's not actually going to do much. And then the little plastic on the fans may or may not do much. If the plastic starts to come off on its own over time and it starts to fold, it could actually throw your fan slightly off balance. So it's a good idea to just go ahead and remove all that stuff. It's just there to protect it in shipping. And we've got a plastic cover here on the back plate. Now, let's see if I can get that removed. I'm pretty sure it's there. I can feel it. Let's see, what are we looking at? Yeah, there's a in red down by my finger there, it says to remove that plastic before installing, because you've got that cold plate, or whatever you want to call the back plate there. It won't be able to breathe properly with the plastic on it. I personally don't agree that the manufacturers should be shipping with all this plastic on there. The reason they're doing it is just to avoid any scratches on the card. And there's really nothing to scratch the card anyway, so I don't quite understand the logic. It seems like a waste of resources, materials, and unnecessary expense, and I hope to see that be done away with in the near future. Now, of course, I always install the video card in the topmost socket. There are some people that disagree that it doesn't matter which socket you put it in, but it depends on the card you've got, it depends on the motherboard you've got, and of course, as the video cards become more powerful, it's going to become more important. So there's absolutely no disadvantage to putting it into the top slot, even if you don't see an advantage to doing it with the current video card hardware you have now. It's a good habit to get into. It should always go in the topmost slot. You know exactly where to plug your monitors in on every computer you ever build, and we have some consistency among the builds, and that's really important to me. And then when the video cards come out that take advantage of the full lanes, or if you have a card or dual cards that are going to take advantage of all the lanes that are offered, you have to use the PCI Express slots that have the most lanes available to achieve that performance. So since nothing else will even come close to using that performance, you might as well go ahead and plug your video card in there. I mean, even the fastest solid state drives that plug into the PCI Express slot are still just ×4. They're not ×16. So you definitely don't need to use your topmost slot for that. And your topmost slot is always going to be your fastest slot. You may have other slots that run the same speed, but the top slot will always be that maximum speed. And so therefore, that's why I always plug the video card into the top slot. Even if it was just a generic, basic, old video card that was only PCI Express ×1, I would still plug it into the ×16 slot. It's all about consistency. It's also about, if the customer goes to upgrade, where do you think the customer is going to put a new video card? So let's say the customer buys a video card in 2019, 3 years from now, and that video card, let's just say, can use all 16 lanes of the PCI Express slot. If I installed his video card into a different slot that was slower, chances are the customer thinks that card is there for a reason, and when they pull it to replace it with the new card, that new card will not run to its best ability. So that's the logic behind it. We always do everything the same, we keep everything consistent, and it's all done for the right reasons. If anything were to possibly cause harm, then we don't do it that way, right? So the potential to cause harm is there if you don't use the topmost slot, even if you don't need it today. These videos are intended for people who are novices, who've never built a computer before. If you understand PCI Express, 4 lanes versus 8 versus 16, you're really not the intended audience for this, and I get the feeling people like you who understand this stuff are watching it to police my videos, like you're some kind of internet police. So some people think I shouldn't even be addressing the trolls out there, these internet police, who have anonymous names and generic avatars and hide behind their keyboards and then spout off rules and facts without any accountability or liability, and cause people to watch my videos, or their intention anyways, to cause people who watch my videos to question my techniques and to question my 25 plus years of experience in doing this and running a sustainable business. And they don't seem to understand or care about the harm they're causing. And their intentions, of course, are that they believe they're doing the right thing. But if it was really important for you to do the right thing, do the world a favor and make a video and show people how to do it. That's why I'm doing it. And the beauty of that is when you make your video, you're going to get a bunch of people just like you who are going to police your video and tell you you don't know what you're doing. And then maybe you'll think twice about whether or not you do that to somebody else. So before you have any negative comment to make regarding the processes that I follow and I teach, I suggest you either leave and go somewhere else or create your own video and show people how to do it the right way that you think is right. And then you can endure the troll army as I have to. You know, when you make these videos, you put yourself out there. You're making the videos for free, and I'm putting myself out there. The purpose of the videos is to help people who are novices. It is not to submit for peer review. My videos are not there for peer review. I've not asked for peer review. And it's offensive to me that I put so much time and effort into something and somebody puts no effort into criticizing it. So as long as people are going to troll me, I'm going to troll them right back. You'll find that I'm somebody who treats people the same way I'm treated. I'm like a mirror. So when somebody says something kind and generous, I am kind and generous back. And when somebody says something selfish and ignorant, then I will be selfish and ignorant. Basically, I have learned in my life to communicate differently to different people, because some people communicate differently. Some people only know how to communicate with their fists, and to those people I communicate with my fist. I don't agree with it and I don't like doing it, but if that's the only language they understand, I don't have any other choice if I wish to communicate with them. So I hope that those of you who are new, that are watching these videos for education, don't pay too much attention to any critical comments, specifically ones that are very accusational, especially if they're coming from somebody with a generic name or a generic avatar where you cannot verify their experience or you cannot verify even who they are. In other words, by me using my full name, Kerry Holzman, you can Google me and you can look up years and years and years, decades of my internet history. You can go back and find news group articles and notices and letters that I've written and help people in technical support, and even other arguments and fights with people in the news groups that were policing the news groups telling me I was wrong. And so this is just, the only thing that's changed now is that this is video now instead of a text-based forum. But it's amazing to me how many people are such cowards that they won't use their real name, even knowing the computer they use is fully being tracked. In other words, if you're using Windows 10 or you're using NVIDIA's GeForce Experience or you're using Web of Trust or you're using any number of software packages that are absolutely tracking everything you do, including on your smartphone, where you are, who your friends are. It doesn't really matter if you choose a fake name anymore. The people in power know exactly who you are and where you are. So you're fooling yourself, and it's just kind of silly to me. So instead of playing those games, it's very important to me that everybody knows this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I do for a living, this is what I've been doing for a living, and my intent is to help people who've never done it before, who maybe have considered it or have always wanted to try it, and to receive criticism for that is so preposterous. So I do remove those comments. I do prune the comments. We like to keep the area positive. Everybody should support one another. If you don't want to support each other, then leave or you will be forced out. So that's the community we have here. And it's sort of like Disneyland, right? If you try to create a fight at Disneyland or wear something offensive, or you want to try and make some sort of bold statement, you will be escorted out of Disneyland. It is private property. You have no right to free speech on private property. This channel belongs to me. It does not belong to the public, and therefore you have no right to free speech on my channel. You have a right to free speech on your own channel. So create your own video. I would love to see nothing more than for all the people who have anything critical to say to actually get off their lazy butts, show their face, expose their name, and then spout their ignorance. That would just make my day. But of course, the trolls, they're too cowardly to actually do that, and they realize that they would completely be a fool. So we don't see that much, but I'm hoping by stating that I'm going to encourage somebody to finally do it, but we'll see what happens. What I've just done now is I've got the video card plugged in and just test fired it to make sure that the system still boots. I had plugged the monitor into the new video card. And of course, because we've already installed Windows 10 booted right up. And now I'm going to have to install the NVIDIA graphics driver. But it's good to know, you saw how easy that was, right? Just plug the video card in, put power to it, and verified Windows still boots. Now, I think at this point, the only thing I have left to do, if I'm not mistaken, is to do the wire tying. And a lot of people have wanted to watch me do the wire tying. And again, how you do cable management really varies on every single piece of hardware you have. One change of one piece of hardware completely changes the cable management. So it's not possible for me to say you always run a cable this way or you always run a cable that way, because it's very unlikely you're going to have two computers that are identical and every single piece of hardware is exactly the same. You can even have two identical pieces of hardware, but they're separate hardware revisions, and even that can cause a difference in how the cable management is done. So cable management isn't really something that's taught. It's something where you have to use your own brain and you have to look at it and determine what looks good to you. And if it doesn't look good to you, you keep changing it until you're happy with it. If you look at it and you go, this doesn't look as good as I feel like it should, then cut those wire ties where you feel you could do better. Wire ties are cheap. You see I've got two big barrels of those plastic barrels between the computer and the monitor are filled with, one's got 4-inch, I keep calling them wire ties, they're nylon zip ties, and the other one's got 8-inch nylon zip ties, and those are for the thicker cables like the power supply cables. And then I've got my wire cutters, which I use to cut the little pigtails off of the nylon zip ties. And I apologize that I keep calling them wire ties, but I intend to say nylon zip ties. So what I'm going to do through here, since people are curious about it, this process does take a while as I experiment and try different things, and of course you can't see much with my back to the camera. So I'm going to just fast forward through this so you can at least watch it in fast motion. And let me go ahead and start that process right now. Let's go ahead and speed that up. All right, now as I get this video sped up, what I've done is I've put it at 10 times normal speed without editing anything out, so you can see every single step that I'm doing, because there's a lot of people who are requesting watching this. Even though a lot of it is going to be with my back to the camera, you will see as I move around, you'll get the idea of how I'm manipulating the cables, and you'll see how many wire ties I'm using and how many that I waste and I have to cut and redo. So I'm leaving that in for your benefit, and it does, even at 10 times normal speed, this video will still end up being a little over 36 minutes long for this final part, which is longer than I really wanted to make it. But again, to accommodate all the requests out there, I thought I'd go ahead and leave this video as unedited as possible. Now, saying that, in breaking up this video into the 5 pieces that I have and then rendering it out in 4K, I've easily got about 60 hours into the editing on this single video all by itself. And of course, doing the video, the audio narration on top of the video adds more editing on top of that. And so people wonder why the videos take so long to come out, and because I have to film the video, and then I have to edit the video, and then I have to render the video. The editing and the rendering take longer than the PC build. And the PC build takes much longer than it normally would because I'm filming. So it's a very slow process, but hopefully it's done for the right reason, that it's worth putting all the extra effort in, if it means that people can walk away feeling a bit more empowered and realizing that they can do this too, that this is something very simple to do, and that a lot of it isn't just a matter of following specific rules or instructions, you know, when it comes to like the cable management, but it's really up to your personal style and taste and your imagination as to what looks good to you. And you can see, you know, having the computer on the Lazy Susan on the turntable there really does help in the cabling portion of it. As you see me spin the computer around, make sure that I'm pulling all the slack that I can towards the back, and so that I can wire tie that. And on occasion you will see I have to get the flashlight because of this case. I have to say, you know, people have asked what are my thoughts on this case. I'm not a fan of NZXT cases at all. I think they're attractive cases, but they're very impractical. The idea that NZXT has put this cover on that blocks entry to the power supply from the front of the computer, I think is a grave mistake by putting aesthetics over functionality. I believe in putting functionality over aesthetics. The fact that it has no optional 5¼ inch bay means that any sort of add-in audio card adapters or overclocking adapters that Asus, for example, ships with certain motherboards will not be compatible with this case. I would rather have a case that has bays I don't need than to have a case that has no bays that I do need. So I also don't like the, as I mentioned before, the angular top. You'll see later on when I'm done with all the cable management that when I put the plastic covers back on the top and the front, the top one in particular is angled like the roof of a house. And it makes it almost impossible to put anything on top of that. In fact, I had sold Mike Smith, the person I do tech bets with, one of the computers with an NZXT Phantom 440, I believe it was, or 410. And he almost immediately took the plastic top off so he could have that flat surface for putting USB drives and such, even paperwork on. People who are using their computer for business often use the top of the computer to store things, especially backup drives. A lot of my customers even have a little 2.5 inch USB drive that's plugged into the computer and on top of the computer that gets swapped out regularly for backups to take place off of the server. So this angular top makes it virtually impossible to use those top USB ports with an external drive, because the cables that come with the external drives are only about 4 to 6 inches long, and so the drive ends up hanging, which makes me very uncomfortable. That's putting a lot of stress on the cable, and the only reason it's done is for looks. Now, some people state that NZXT does that on purpose so you can mount fans on top of the radiator on the other side in a push or pull configuration, really. I don't know why you'd blow hot air into your computer, but you could if you wanted to. But that still doesn't mean they had to angle it. They could have added a couple extra inches to the top of the computer and made the top flat, or gave it, like Thermaltake has done, where they've got little trays that you can actually put screws in or put flash drives in, or even put a 2.5 inch external USB drive, sit it right into that little, it's trying to describe it, but it looks like a little jewelry drawer or something that's just exposed. It's not a drawer, it's just an indentation in the top of the case. So it seems to me NZXT is all about aesthetics first and functionality second, and that's on every single NZXT case I've ever seen. Now, they do have pretty decent cable management options. I mean, there's a lot of little bridges for the nylon zip ties to go through, which is giving me a lot of ways to secure those cables, which I do like. But I wouldn't choose this case for myself, and I wouldn't recommend it to people. This customer and I had a discussion about it. He really, really liked this case. He didn't think that having the angular top was going to interfere with his usage of the computer in the way that he uses it. And so, you know, my concern ultimately is that my customer's expectations are met. I don't want my customer to end up getting a computer and go, hey, you didn't tell me I wouldn't be able to rest anything on top of my computer. If I'd have known that, I wouldn't have ordered it. So if the customer is okay with the conditions, then I'm okay with building it. So one of the other questions I get, since we're sitting here staring at my back while I do more cable management, is why you don't see me test the motherboard before I install it in the computer. I personally believe, it is my opinion, that the only people who will test a motherboard before they install it in the computer... Oh, looks like I did the cable management and just did my first test fire, and it's working. That's good. So that means now it's ready to be buttoned up and sent back to the customer. So there goes that top I was talking about right there. But anyway, as I'm putting the panels back on, I just wanted to address really quickly, the only time I think you'll ever see anybody test a motherboard before they install it in a computer is somebody who has no confidence in their ability to do the job correctly, or they have no confidence in the parts that they selected. I personally think it's a very bad idea to test your motherboard outside of the case, because what you're doing is you're opening up an opportunity for damage and for static and for all kinds of bad things to happen with that motherboard and RAM and everything being exposed for no reason. For me, it's no reason, because I haven't had a dead on arrival part or a DOA part in probably 4 to 6 years. I don't know. It's been a really long time since I've received a part that was just dead out of the box. So personally, to me, it's a complete waste of time. On the other hand, if you're somebody who is insecure, you're not quite sure you know what you're doing, and you want to test everything along the way, I could understand why you're doing that. Or if maybe you bought a motherboard at a garage sale, or it was some really cheap discounted motherboard from a manufacturer you never heard before, and you're not quite sure if this motherboard is going to be good or not, then I can understand why you would test it before you would go through the trouble of installing it. So if you ever see anybody do that, what you can interpret from that is they either have no confidence in their skills as a builder, which is not an insult. Like if you've never built a computer before, you don't have any confidence in it, right? The only way you're going to get confidence is through experience. Or they're using parts that they don't trust. I would never use parts I don't trust unless I was building a computer strictly for me that was not going to go to a customer, and it was just how I wanted to spend my free time. Like, I don't do this enough. Spending time to build a computer that I couldn't sell to a customer because I can't stand behind it because I have no experience with it and I don't trust it. So anyway, that's what you can take from that. And I want to reiterate that, anytime you ever see somebody test a motherboard before they install it in the system, they either have no confidence in their ability of what they're doing, or they're using parts they don't trust. So you won't see that on my channel because I am confident in what I'm doing, and I only use parts I trust. So I hope that answers that question for you folks. And I'm right now just putting that rear panel on where I just did all the cable management. And the cables, when you do your cable management, it's very important you don't bundle too many of them together, or that back panel may not go on correctly. So I'm checking the back panel now, and it looks like I see something I don't like. It looks like one of the tabs did not go in. And it's a little bit of a struggle for me. You see, I'm using both of my, from my elbow to my wrist, on the top and bottom, pushing down, and then I'm using my chest to push the panel forward. So it requires practically every body appendage I have. But it's not bubbled out, it's not bowed in any way, so that means I don't have to redo the cable management. It was tight though, and there's just a bundle of cables there that were just a hair too thick. And if it really bothered me that much, if I couldn't get the side panel on to my satisfaction, I would have cut those wire ties and rerouted some of those cables away from that specific bundle where they all collected. Or not where all of them collected, but where enough of them collected to create that little hump for that panel to get over. So finally now, the last panel I have to put on is the windowed panel, and it's now time to remove the plastic. I don't like to ship with the plastic on because it's not necessary. Nothing's going to get scratched or damaged when the whole computer is covered in plastic and styrofoam. So in most cases, I do remove that plastic so my customer can easily remove the computer from the box, plug it in, and immediately start using it. Now it does appear for some reason that I've left this plastic on, and I'm not sure if I'm leaving it on in this case. This computer's actually going to the island of Bermuda, and so after I ship it, it's going to go on a boat. Bermuda's about 300 miles off the coast of North Carolina. So I don't know if you've ever been on a boat, but it's kind of rocky and things can get damaged really easily. So I think that's what I was thinking. I think I was about to peel that plastic off, and then it occurred to me, this is not a normal shipping situation. And as I mentioned, I don't ship outside of the United States, so people will ask, well, Bermuda's outside of the United States. I'm actually not shipping it to Bermuda. I'm shipping it to New Jersey. The people in New Jersey are then shipping it to Bermuda, if that makes any sense. So I'm not responsible for it from, if it arrives in one piece in New Jersey, my job is done. Unfortunately, nobody's going to know that because the box isn't going to get opened until it's in Bermuda. But the good news is the client in Bermuda did receive the computer 100% intact without any problems, and has let me know that he's very, very happy with it. So I'm not exactly sure. I think I'm done, but there seems to be... Before I box it up, see, I'm so anxious to get this thing boxed up, it occurs to me now that I've got it all together, one of the very last things you've got to do if you're selling the computer to somebody is you need to make sure it still works. Quite often you can pinch a wire or dislodge a wire in the process of getting everything put back together again. You may not realize that you've disconnected something. So once everything's together and the cable management's done and you think it's ready to deliver, it's very important you do that final power on self-test. Now with regards to a burn-in test, we used to do that in the 90s and in the 80s. Well, 90s and early 2000s. We used to burn the computers in for 24 hours. But these days, if you can get Windows to install without any errors, chances are it's going to run just fine. Back in the day, DOS and early versions of Windows did not, I'm testing the light. See that? I'm not just testing to make sure that the computer works, but also that the fans are working and that the light is working. So anyway, so basically what I was saying was that back in the 90s and in the early 2000s, we used to burn in computers because DOS, well, that's the button that I'm pressing. DOS and Windows just didn't push the system very hard. It wasn't until you actually ran a burn-in test that you pushed the system to its limits that you would then see crashes and failures happen, and sometimes not right away, but as they heated up. So that's why we let them run overnight. At the very least, it was overnight, right? So when I worked at a company that built computers, the last step in the building process was to start the burn-in, and you would let that run and move on to the next computer, build it, get the burn-in test. And at the end of the day, you just let all those burn-in tests run. And the next morning, if they were still running, so clearly it wasn't 24 hours, but it would vary depending on when the test was started. But at the end of the day, the computers were all left running the burn-in, and then the first thing in the morning, we would check those computers out to make sure that they passed that burn-in. But since about Windows XP, I would say, Windows XP utilizes, and every operating system after that, not just XP, but starting with XP, it utilizes a lot of computer resources to get installed properly. And because of that, if you can get Windows installed without any errors, chances are your RAM is fine and your video card's fine, everything's probably going to be okay. So burn-in tests are no longer necessary. There are much fewer components on a computer today. Well, I should say much less modular components. A lot of stuff is built onto the motherboard these days. So, there's a good chance that if you were able to get Windows installed, you connected it to your network, you downloaded your Windows updates. I won't use like the WSUS updater because it doesn't test the Windows updates. So I need to make sure that the system's going to work the way the customer's going to use it. And so all updates are grabbed through Windows Update that verifies that the network interface card is working, that internet connectivity is functioning. Some people don't like the stickers that I've been putting on the computer, so I've been decided to put the stickers in the box and let the customer decide where to put the stickers. And then I've got a silver Sharpie, and what I'm doing is on the inside panel where nobody can see it but the owner, I am signing my name and putting the date that the computer was built. And I haven't had a single customer complain about that, but we'll see in the comments how many people think that that's rude for me to do. But yeah, it does look like I decided to keep the plastic on the window because of that, the shipping that this is going to be going through. And then this should be it right here, the final 2 screws, and everything should be ready to rock and roll. All the spare parts are in the motherboard box. So if the customer wants to upgrade in the future, they have all the screws and all the manuals and everything they need. I think there's even a bridging connector in there to go SLI if they want to do that with the NVIDIA graphics card. And then this is the part I look forward to, and that is sending my children off to their new homes, my new baby. So this is exactly how the computer case came out of the box. And that's why it's important, if you're going to ship a computer, you want to ship it in the box the case shipped in. So pay attention to how the case came out of the box. Did it come out of the box upright, or did it come out of the box with the top facing up? In other words, the front panel that we're looking at dead on right now could actually face up in the box, depending on how the manufacturer has packed it. Just like these styrofoam, these pieces of styrofoam that I'm trying to get to fit, there sometimes is a question, does it go on the top or does it go on the front and the back, or the top or the bottom? So if you remember that when you take it out of the box, you will have less of a struggle getting it back into the box. And then of course, work with gravity. And as you can see, I'm going to flip it over and it's going to seat itself right into that styrofoam. And then I'm going to just pull that plastic up just the way it was, the way it came out of the box. You'll hear that theme again and again. And these styrofoam pieces often only fit one direction because the front of this case is angled like the top. Then the one edge of the styrofoam is angled to accommodate that. And then of course, you never pull the computer out of the box and you never put the computer back in the box. What you're going to do is lift the box off of the computer when it's new, or out, you lift the box off of the case, or you drop or gently place the box back over the case when it's done. Don't try and do it the other way around. Don't try and put the computer back into the box. Put the box over the computer. And you'll see me doing that here. What I'm doing is I've got to flip it the other way around, right? Because the best way I can explain this, and I'm struggling with it because the styrofoam's not staying on tight, that the front of the computer is going to face up. So since I'm putting the box on top, I have to make sure the front of the computer faces down so that when the box goes over the top, the bottom of the box will be on top, right? So I need the back of the computer facing the back of the box. And I slide the box over the computer. And then the only thing you've got to watch out for here are the cardboard flaps. Make sure that that I hold those out of the way. You'll see the ones on the side like to stay down, and that's what's happening on the opposite side. And I'm going to walk over there and pull that out. There it is. Now it'll sit all the way down. And now it's locked into that box, and it's safe for me now to take that box and flip it back right side up. But before I do that, I have to pay attention. I had to have paid attention which way the video card was seated. I want that video card seated facing down. So I don't want the video card hanging upside down when it ships. The important thing when you ship a computer with a graphics card is that you ship the computer lying flat inside another larger box with the address label on the top of the box, so the shipper has no choice but to have the box in one direction. In other words, if they were to move the box any other direction, they wouldn't be able to see the address of where it's going to. That way the computer is never, the innards of the computer are never hanging upside down. So for example, if this wasn't paid attention to, it would be a 50-50 coin toss as to whether or not the box is going to be laying there being jarred up and down by the shipper's vehicle or on a boat, as the case may be, and breaking those parts loose. Versus if the parts are facing the ground or facing the bottom, then there's nothing to shake loose. So I'm trying to find a better way to describe that. But essentially all it means is we want gravity to work with us. We don't want any of the parts hanging upside down for any significant period of time while it's in travel. And now that I've got the arrow indicating, so the arrow indicates which side to put the box up. That means the video card is installed in the opposite direction of the arrow. Does that make sense? We always put this side up on a package. We never say this side down. But there it is. That's the computer completely finished. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.